And so my dad worked for a man who brought us out here every winter to Redlands for 5 years. And he just had a layman's library. He was not a student himself. I mean, he was not a professional student, but he liked good books. And it was his library, the one that I read, Child's History of England, boy. And I discovered, well, that's where I really discovered Sherlock Holmes. It was in his library. And, the O. Henry books, all of these titles. And more to the point, they were there, and he would allow me to come into the living room, which was also his library, and sit there and read them. Now, this is my dad's boss, and then sometimes I'd be sitting there so immersed in a book that I wouldn't realize that the people who owned the place had come home, and maybe they'd like to sit down in their own living room. I'd still be sitting there. You know. I also caddied for this man, a man named Livy Blair Boyd. And he asked me one time what I'd like to be when I grew up, as this phrase has it, you know. And I think I must have said a telegraph operator, and I can't even remember why now. But my dad bought me a little toy set, telegraph set, but a real one. There were 2 sets, and the other one was in the other room, you know. You could learn to send and receive. Mm-hmm. And when we went back to Hillsborough then, this same man took me by the hand and took me to the Western Union office, where he had a very nice account. They were not about to turn him down, and said, see if you can't teach this kid to be a telegraph operator. And the manager of the place sort of stuck with it, except for the fact that I would also be a messenger while all this was going on.
How old were you at this time?
I must have been around 10 or so. I can't remember exactly. But anyhow, I worked there then all through the summer, and then in the fall, I came in the morning and then came back in the late afternoon. And in a small town like that, this is not as bad as it sounds, and they just let the telegrams pile up and got there. But sometimes I had to ride a bicycle way the hell out the edge of town to deliver a telegram.
You remember how much you got paid?
It was, I think the base pay was about $1 a week or something like that, and then tips, of which there weren't very many. Mm-hmm. But on a part-time basis, that $1 a week sounds a little ridiculous now, but it wasn't much so, because I was being taught the trade at the same time.
And your overhead wasn't very big.
Wasn't very big. No.
You got a lot of horsepower out of those pedals on the bicycle.
Oh, indeed, probably very healthy ones, except for the fact that you had to go out in any weather. And then during the war, then it got to be really tricky because the flu caught up with us very quickly.
Oh, yes.
And you'd have to deliver telegrams, usually death messages. Mm. And you knew, because one of the jobs was, before you went out with the telegram, you folded it and put it in the envelope.
Oh, my gosh.
So you knew what was in there. And you would drive up to a place sometimes, and people couldn't even read or write, and you have to read this to them. And sometimes they were just so excited, they knew a telegram, some people never get a telegram except when it's a death message.
Yes.
And so they knew what was in there. And son and Joey was in camp somewhere there.
Well, then for a young boy, you were exposed to some pretty strong human emotions, even at those ages, at that age.
And then I also caught the flu from somebody along the line. See, you had to sign for a telegram in those days. Mm-hmm. They didn't just hand it to you as they do now. You actually had to sign the book, and somewhere along the line I picked up the flu and came down with it. Probably gave it to the whole family, because we were all down with it at the same time. My mother and father and I.
This was, just to get back briefly to the 75th birthday weekend, another part of that weekend was your chalk talk, and that was one of the highlights of the evening. This was like a dress-up dinner, and there were about 200 people, as I remember.
Yes.
And you were given an award from the, was it the senator from Ohio, or what was that? It's a little vague in my head right now.
The governor, there were 2 things. One was the senator, and the other was the governor, who's an old friend of mine, by the way. And the senator is a young friend. The governor is an old guy, just retiring, by the way, this year. But he was at Ohio State when I was. And anyway, back to the point of the thing was it was one of those native son things which are a cherished award. You always think of getting them when you're a kid, and when it finally happens, you're very pleased about it. I was delighted to have this this recognition as a native son of Ohio. You can almost read the inscription in your mind.
Yes.
And some other.
It was a very moving moment
Yeah.
there, and the applause were just deafening. In fact, you got a standing ovation.
Yes,
I remember.
very nice,
Yeah.
very nice. And the audience was sharp in that they knew what was going. They knew what it was all about. They knew all about the background of this stuff. I've been around that place so long that I was fired from the Columbus Dispatch after I got out of college, where I'd spent 5 years of college on their
I
payroll.
never knew you were ever fired for anything. What was this?
This was the Depression, and they fired 10 of us at the same time. They fired the single people first,
Oh, yes.
and then the young marrieds, which I was.
It certainly wasn't because of the lack of skill in any
No,
area.
I suppose I had my enemies in the upper echelons. One friend of ours, who's a member of the family that owns the newspaper, said that he thought that Billy Ireland suggested that I be fired,
Oh,
and just to kick me out of there instead of hanging around and atrophying on the staff of a paper, that it would force me into moving on, going on.
Billy Ireland was your mentor.
Yeah.
Well, that might have been. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I never had any way of corroborating it or not.
Hmm.
Now, another guy out there said that he thought Billy Ireland considered me a rival, which is ridiculous on the face of it.
Yes.
We did entirely different things.
Yes.
So that, I think, is absurd. That being kicked out to go upstairs makes more sense
Mm-hmm.
to me. Because he was always a warm supporter. And when I first got Terry and thing to do, I sent him a set of the first proofs. And he wrote back a long, handwritten, warm letter of support.